I always knew that my family was more than perfectly served dinners, impeccable manners, and conversations full of artificial politeness. But even in my wildest guesses, I could not imagine that behind this brilliant facade there were years of lies, betrayal, and carefully guarded secrets that would shatter overnight, destroying everything that I thought was unshakable. And when my father, with a haggard face and trembling hands, said, "You're mine, only you," I realized that the scariest truth was yet to come. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. My name is Erica, and I am the eldest of 3 children. My father runs his own business, and my mother works part-time for some trading company. There are also twins Lisa and Charlie, who are 6 years younger than me. They were always the golden children, the ones who couldn't do anything wrong in the eyes of our parents. Since the twins were born, my role in the family has changed dramatically. I wasn't just an older sister, I became their live-in babysitter, housekeeper, and personal assistant all rolled into one, while other kids my age enjoyed childhood. I picked up the twins from school, helped them with their homework, and took them to various extracurricular activities. The house was also my responsibility. Cleaning, cooking, grocery shopping, whatever. I did it while Lisa and Charlie didn't lift a finger. They came home, threw their backpacks wherever they wanted, and left a mess behind, as if it were their job. Their clothes were scattered everywhere, textbooks were opened in the middle of the page and remained on the table, and dirty plates could stand in their room for days, waiting for me to put them away. One day, when I was about 15 years old, I finally plucked up the courage to talk to my parents about this agreement. For months, even years, I was silent. I endured, telling myself that this was how it should be, that maybe one day they would notice how hard it was for me and tell me, "You deserve a rest." But that day did not come. "Mom, Dad," I said during dinner, trying to keep my voice level, even though my heart was beating as if I was about to confess something terrible. "Why am I the only one who has to do this? All the housework, Lisa and Charlie never help with anything." Mom put down her fork and looked at me in a way that made me feel ridiculous even asking that question. It was as if I was talking about something completely absurd and unacceptable. "Darling, that's how families work. The older child always has more responsibilities." "But it's not true," I protested, feeling a surge of indignation. I was at Sarah and Jessica's homes, and their families shared responsibilities equally among all the children. "These families are not raising their children properly," Mom replied sharply, and an expression appeared on her face that left no room for further discussion. "That's the thing. You get ideas from your friends." The twins exchanged knowing grins across the table. They liked the way Mom closed the subject and put me in my place. They knew that they would always remain in a privileged position. And later that week, when I had problems again, I realized that they didn't even have to do anything to remain favorites. I tried to talk to Lisa and Charlie directly about how they could help more. "Why don't you guys never help around the house?" I asked them while we were doing our homework. Lisa rolled her eyes, as if I'd just offered her something completely ridiculous. "Mom says we need to focus on studying and studying. This is our main task." "Yes," Charlie chimed in with a smug grin. "And you have to do everything that Mom told us to do." But it wasn't just about household chores. The twins seemed to enjoy making my life difficult. They deliberately ruined the rooms as soon as I finished cleaning, throwing things around or overturning chairs, as if a hurricane had swept through the house. They broke things and then blamed me for it, and it never even occurred to my parents to doubt their words. Sometimes they lied to their parents, claiming that I didn't help them with their homework or forgot to buy something they asked for. My last year of high school was supposed to be exciting. A time filled with applying to college, visiting campuses, and dreaming about the future. Instead, it became another reminder that I will always be second only to the twins in my family. I remember that evening clearly. I was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by college brochures when my parents came home. I didn't even look up right away. I was too immersed in calculations, trying to figure out what options I had, which universities would offer the best conditions, where I could take on an additional part-time job to support myself during my studies. But as soon as I heard the front door slam shut, I felt something was wrong. There was that tension in the air that always preceded unpleasant conversations, those conversations in which I was about to hear something I didn't want to hear at all. My parents had that exact look on their faces, guilty but determined, when they were about to tell me the bad news, knowing in advance that my protests wouldn't change anything. "Erica, we need to talk about college," my father began, not quite meeting my gaze, as if he hoped that if he didn't look me in the eye, it would be easier for me to accept his words. Mom pursed her lips, nervously clasping her hands, and when she spoke, her voice bounced with uncertainty. "In fact, we studied our finances, and we just don't have the money for your higher education," she said with the same intonation with which people tell children that their beloved pet has run away, although in fact he died. "All our savings should be used for the twins' future education." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt an icy wave run through my body, as my fists clenched, and indignation vibrated in my chest. I sat and looked at the pamphlets, which now seemed to mock me with their promises of a bright future and new opportunities. They told me that the world was open, that all the roads were in front of me, but in an instant these roads were closed. "But I've been working so hard," I managed to say, and my voice was barely above a whisper. "My grades are good, I can get a scholarship." "The decision is final," my mother interrupted me, and there was no longer the same gentleness in her voice as before. "We need to think about Lisa and Charlie's future." "What about my future?" I clenched my teeth, feeling tears coming to my eyes, but not letting them fall. My father sighed heavily, awkwardly patting me on the shoulder, as if I were not a daughter who had just crossed out her dream, but a neighbor who had lost in the lottery. "You're resourceful, dear," he said, trying to smile, but it came out crooked and unconvincing. "You'll think of something." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the twins laughing in their room down the hall. They already knew. I could tell by the way they grinned at me again during dinner, the way they held back their laughter when I tried to contradict my parents. They got everything, and I got nothing. But something in me broke that night. Or maybe, on the contrary, something in me came together with a new force, with a new rage. Instead of giving up, I got angry. I got really angry. The next day, I started looking for a job. I knew that I could not turn to anyone for help, that it was not worth waiting for a miracle, that the only person who could change my life was myself. Within 2 weeks, I found an entry-level position at a corporation. The job wasn't glamorous, not the kind you dream of as a kid, but it paid enough to rent a tiny apartment where I no longer had to clean up after Lisa and Charlie. The day after graduation, I moved in. No tearful goodbyes, no dramatic scenes. She just packed her things, closed the door behind her, and left. The following years were difficult. I've been working like hell. I took every opportunity, studied everything I could, volunteered for additional projects, and stayed up late, showing my superiors that I was ready to do anything for success. I didn't have a college degree, but I had the best experience in the real world and a fierce determination to succeed. While Lisa and Charlie graduated as planned, my parents found enough money to pay for their education, housing, and expenses. They graduated from university with gorgeous diplomas and an even more gorgeous attitude to life, expecting the world to fall at their feet just because they have a piece of paper confirming their unique talents. The irony was that Lisa couldn't hold down a job for more than 3 or 4 months. She always had excuses. Her boss was a fool, her colleagues were envious, and the conditions were unsuitable. There was always a reason why she quit her next job, confident that next time everything would be perfect. Charlie, in turn, worked as a warehouse supervisor, a position that definitely didn't require the expensive degree our parents went into debt for. But oh, how they loved to bring up the topic of their higher education at every family gathering. As someone with a degree in business administration, Lisa would begin, giving me the sidelong glance she'd honed over the years. "You know, back in college," Charlie always added to keep up. And I just sat there sipping wine and thinking about my salary, which exceeded their combined income. Sometimes I had to hide my smile behind a glass when they started bragging about their degrees, living paycheck to paycheck. One day, during my lunch break, I was mindlessly scrolling through my social media feed while lazily biting into a sandwich. My thoughts were far away. Another meeting that I had to hold, a new candidate for a position in my department that needed to be considered, and in general, the day was overloaded with tasks, so it was a minute-long mindless scrolling of the screen. It was almost an act of meditation. But as soon as I saw the familiar name and photo, my finger froze and my gaze lingered on the image. My cousin Sarah was standing in a gorgeous emerald green dress, beaming at the camera, and the caption under the photo read, "I can't wait for Aunt Margaret's big party." I froze with the sandwich halfway to my mouth, feeling like something heavy was sinking into my stomach. My mother's birthday was just a few weeks away, but I hadn't heard anything about any holiday, no calls, no invitations, not the slightest hint. Maybe I jumped to conclusions. Maybe it was about something else. However, my intuition, honed by years of communication with my family, told me that a coincidence was hardly possible here. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I debated whether to ask directly, but before I could change my mind, I had already typed a message, "Beautiful dress." Sarah's answer came almost instantly, as if she had been waiting for the question. "Aunt Margaret's 55th birthday party. It's going to be amazing. How come you haven't started planning your outfit yet?" A cold wave washed over my head. I felt as if I'd been plunged into icy water. My breath caught, my fingers trembled, and my thoughts froze in my head for one long moment. My mother was planning a big party in honor of her birthday, but I, her eldest daughter, didn't know anything about it. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened my phone's contact list and selected my mom's number. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest and anger flaring up inside, mixed with something more painful than just irritation, the same feeling that arises when you are shown your uselessness right in your face. Mom answered on the fourth ring, her voice focused and slightly annoyed, as always when I called her for a reason I hadn't previously agreed upon. "Erica, what happened?" "I'm pretty busy right now." I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady, but my voice faltered anyway. "I just saw Sarah's post about your birthday. Why haven't I heard anything about this?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, too long, too meaningful, and when Mom finally spoke, there was that condescending tone in her voice that I'd heard since I was a kid, the tone she used when she thought my questions were stupid or my feelings were unimportant. "Oh, well, Erica," she sighed as if I'd asked something completely unimportant. "I didn't invite you because I don't want you there." I even pulled the phone away from my ear for a moment and stared at the phone screen, as if hoping that I had misheard it, that it was some kind of ridiculous mistake, joke, misunderstanding. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but I was already shaking inside. "You don't want me to be there?" "I'm your daughter." "Yes, well," she cleared her throat, and I already knew that something particularly unpleasant was about to follow. "The thing is, Erica, this is going to be a pretty prestigious event. There will be a lot of important people there. Your father's business associates, my friends from the country club, people from high society, and, frankly, it would be awkward for me to represent you." I felt a chill squeeze my chest, and my fingers on the phone turned white with tension. "Is it awkward to introduce me?" It took me a while to understand the meaning of her words, because they sounded like it was something that went without saying, something that didn't even need to be explained. "You don't have a college degree, Erica," she continued in the same flat, almost benevolent tone that made every word even more humiliating. "What would I say when people ask what you do?" "That would be inconvenient." I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling a dull noise grow in my head, as something inside me slowly but surely cracks, breaks, and crumbles into invisible dust. "Are Lisa and Charlie invited?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Of course they're invited," she replied, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. "They're college graduates. They understand how to behave in a refined company." I thought about Lisa, who couldn't hold down a job for more than a few months, always finding excuses for her inaction, and Charlie, who worked in a warehouse and didn't use his expensive diploma a single gram, but they were, of course, sophisticated enough for a party at my mom's. I see, I finally said, and my voice sounded so strange, so distant, that I barely recognized it. So that's what you really think of me. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Erica, Mom sighed, and there was more annoyance than regret in that sigh. That's why I didn't want this conversation. You always turn everything into such a scene. I always knew that my mother loved the twins more than she loved me. I always felt that there was some kind of gap between us, that her admiration for their successes was something more than just parental pride. But this was different. It wasn't just a preferential attitude, it wasn't just a casual disregard. It was my own mother openly telling me that she was ashamed of me, that I wasn't good enough to show my family in public. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning in bed and replaying our conversation over and over in my head, as if trying to find some kind of loophole in it, some other, more acceptable explanation for my mother's words, but each time I came to the same conclusion. She said exactly what she meant. And I didn't feel the slightest regret. These words, soaked in cold contempt and years of disappointment, echoed in my mind, penetrating into the most vulnerable corners of my soul, tearing them to pieces, and every time I closed my eyes, I heard her condescending voice saying over and over again, "It would be embarrassing for me to imagine you." By morning, exhausted, I tried to convince myself that my father, who had always been more reasonable than my mother, could not agree with this decision, that even if he favored the twins more than he favored me, he still could not be so cruel as to support her in this. I needed to hear his point of view. I needed at least someone in this family to confirm that I wasn't crazy, that I had the right to feel betrayed, offended, that I was still a part of this family. I went to my parents the next morning, rehearsing in my head all the way what I would say, how I would build a conversation, what words I would convey to him, how painful it was for me to hear such a thing from my mother. But the closer I got to the house, the more I was seized with doubts. What if he stood on her side? Should he tell me the same thing? When I turned into the driveway, I immediately noticed Lisa and Charlie's cars parked outside the house, and I felt everything go cold inside. Fine. The whole family is here to watch another drama performed by Erica. I got out of the car, took a deep breath, and went to the door, knocking firmly on it. A few moments later, the door opened and my mother appeared on the threshold, her face immediately clouded with annoyance, as if I were not her daughter, but a salesman interrupting her day with an unnecessary offer. "Erica, what are you doing here?" "What is it?" she asked, not even trying to hide her displeasure. "I need to talk to Dad," I replied, pushing past her into the house before she could slam the door in my face. They were all in the living room, as if they were waiting for me, my father in his usual armchair, Lisa and Charlie lounging on the couch, their poses so relaxed, so confident, as if they owned the place. "Dad," I began, feeling my voice tremble with excitement and suppressed anger, "did Mom tell you about our conversation yesterday? What do you think about it?" My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, not looking up at me, and I already knew the answer. Even before he said it, I knew, but until the last moment I clung to the faint hope that he would say something else anyway. "I think your mother is right," he said slowly, and the words hit me like a slap in the face. "It would have been better if you hadn't come." I froze in place, my heart pounding in my chest, and red spots swam before my eyes. I looked around the room, peering into the faces of these people who were supposed to be my family, looking for at least a shadow of doubt, at least a hint of remorse, but I met only indifference and condescending expectation of when I would make a scene, as usual. "Do you all feel that way?" I asked, my voice low, almost a whisper. Lisa rolled her eyes, leaning back on the sofa in annoyance. "No one wants you there," she said. Charlie nodded, stretching lazily. "For the first time, can't you just accept something without making it a big problem?" I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "So none of you see what's wrong with excluding me from the family celebration?" I asked, feeling my hands clench into fists. "Don't you understand how unfair this is? It's been like this all my life. The twins are my favorites, and I'm sidelined. You don't even see me as part of this family anymore, do you? Lisa jumped to her feet, pointing at me accusingly. That's why we don't want you there. She blurted out. You are such a drama queen, Erica. You're always making scenes, always reacting negatively to everything. Every time something good happens to us, you try to ruin everything with your attitude. You're just jealous because Charlie and I have achieved something, and you. I cut her off abruptly, feeling something dark, seething, uncontrollable explode inside me. What have you achieved? Lisa, you can't hold down a job for 3 months. Charlie is working at the warehouse. Everything you've achieved is a joke. Mom gasped, clutching the pearls in her hands, as if I had just committed some terrible social offense. I turned to my father, desperately looking for at least a drop of support in his face, but his expression became hard, cold, alien. I think it's time for you to leave, he said firmly. This conversation is over. Leave our house immediately. I stood there, unable to move, feeling my whole being resisting those words, but there was too much finality in their gazes, too much indifference for me to continue. Turning around, I quickly ran out of the house, slamming the door so hard that the windows rattled. When I got into the car, my fingers were shaking on the steering wheel, and I looked up at the living room window, where they were all standing, probably already discussing how dramatic I was. But I didn't care. They finally showed their true colors. They all say that revenge is a dish that is served cold. But sometimes life gives you an opportunity that you can't miss. That's exactly what happened. 2 weeks before my mother's birthday, without thinking about the upcoming events, I had lunch in a small cafe in the city center, not in my usual place, because there were too many people there, and I did not like noisy companies and fuss around. I wanted to spend this lunch break in peace, to get away from all the disturbing thoughts, but fate, as it turned out, ordered otherwise. While I was waiting for my order, I was absent-mindedly looking around the room, watching the customers who were lazily chatting over cups of coffee, and at that moment my gaze suddenly caught on a familiar figure sitting in the far corner. My heart made a strange leap when I realized that this was my mother, trying to remain unnoticed under a wide-brimmed hat, but I would have recognized her posture anywhere, even if she had hidden behind 1,000 masks. However, that wasn't what caught my attention the most. Sitting across from her was a man I had never seen before, and this man was definitely not my father. He looked respectable, well-groomed, in an expensive business suit, with that confident expression on his face that men who are used to controlling a situation have. Something about his manner, the way he leaned forward and lightly touched my mother's hand, made me wary, but what really struck me was her response, the light, almost girlish laugh she responded to his touch. She giggled like a schoolgirl, and at that moment I felt my fingers involuntarily clench into a fist. Before I realized what I was doing, I was already holding my phone in my hands, pretending to mindlessly scroll through my social media feed, but in reality pointing the camera in their direction. A click. He bends down again, his fingers sliding over my mother's wrist. A click. She smiles at him in a way I've never seen her smile at her father. A click. They laugh together, their gazes intertwined in a kind of special tacit understanding. I didn't know how long they stayed there, but after about an hour they got up from the table. I waited, pretending to be busy with my phone, then followed them outside. They got into his car, a sleek, black Mercedes, perfectly polished, like a status symbol. Without hesitation, I started my car and carefully followed, keeping a safe distance. At one of the traffic lights, I managed to take some clear pictures. He leans towards her, and their lips meet in a passionate kiss full of desire and complete disregard for the world around them. They didn't even try to hide, as if they were sure that no one would find out, no one would notice, no one would judge. A few minutes later, their cars stopped at the Grand Plaza Hotel. I parked across the street and watched them walk out, holding hands like teenagers in love, as if decades of marriage, commitment, and family hadn't connected them. They didn't even look back, as if they were sure that their little secret would forever remain a secret. I filmed how they went inside, how they checked in at the counter, how they couldn't take their hands off each other while waiting for the elevator. At home, I started planning. A couple of hours on the internet, and his car number led me to his identity. Richard Thompson, successful developer, office in the city center, married, father of 3 children. The perfect candidate for a scandal. I spent the next few days getting ready. I professionally printed out the photos in large format, selecting the most compromising frames. One of them, that kiss in the car, turned out to be particularly successful. Every millimeter of their lips, every shade of their passion was captured flawlessly. I saved the footage at the entrance to the hotel on a USB drive, additionally adding several videos. I bought the most elegant gift box I could find, cream-colored with gold trim. I carefully rolled each photo into a tube and tied it with a silk ribbon, giving it an aesthetic and expensive look, because my mother always said that everything should be exquisite. The greeting card was the finishing touch. I wrote out Mr. Thompson's full name and address in beautiful calligraphy, and inside I wrote just a few words. I think you will be interested to know who your husband really is. This card was intended for his wife, whose presence at the celebration my mother specifically mentioned, being proud of her exquisite guest list. I closed the box and tied it with a beautiful golden bow with a bell. She looked exactly like an expensive birthday present should look. No one will suspect what's hiding inside until it's too late. It was my mother's birthday. I've organized everything perfectly. The courier was supposed to deliver the parcel at exactly 8:30 p.m., when, according to my calculations, the opening ceremony of the gifts would begin. That evening, I sat in my apartment, nervously checking my phone every few minutes. I was hot, despite the open window, and I couldn't figure out why my fingers were shaking slightly when I brought a glass of water to my lips. I wasn't afraid, no. It was something else, excitement, anticipation, sweet anticipation of the moment of truth. At 20:32, I received a confirmation of delivery. Now all I had to do was wait. The next morning, my phone rang at exactly 7 o'clock, and without even looking at the screen, I already knew who it was. Sarah. The only person who could have woken me up so early without a shadow of a doubt, sincerely believing that her news was more important than anything else. I reached for the phone, but I barely had time to bring it to my ear when an excited voice came from the speaker. "Oh my God, Erica, you won't believe what happened at the party last night." She didn't even wait for my answer, didn't give me a chance to yawn or even process her words before she continued, swallowing the words with excitement. It was absolutely crazy. Everything went exactly as Aunt Margaret wanted, perfectly, exquisitely, with her theatrical brilliance, where every detail had to be impeccable. I imagined this scene all too vividly, my mother, surrounded by guests, proud and smug, enjoying the attention she always so appreciated. Of course, everything was going exactly as she wanted. Until the moment of truth arrived. And then they started opening presents, Sarah continued, and I heard her take a deep breath, as if she still couldn't believe what had happened. Aunt Margaret made a big show of reading each card out loud, enthusiastically praising each giver, until she got to that elegant cream box. I could clearly imagine my mom picking up my box, admiring its impeccable design, probably even making some comment about the gift giver's sense of taste before untying the ribbon. She actually said it was the most beautifully designed gift she'd ever received. Sarah's voice cracked with barely contained laughter, and then she paused, as if deliberately pausing for me to ask. "Then what?" I tried my best to keep my tone neutral, but something inside me quivered like thin glass before it shattered. She unfolded the first photo, Sarah squealed, as if recounting an episode of her favorite TV series, and, Erica, I've never seen someone's face change color so quickly. She turned pale at first, then red, then pale again. I closed my eyes, imagining this moment, my mother, proud, confident in her impeccable status, suddenly faced with a cruel truth that could not be denied. And then what happened? Everything exploded. Sarah's voice became almost shrill. In the first photo, she's kissing some man, and lo and behold, this man and his wife were at a party. I gripped the phone tighter, imagining Richard Thompson, fully confident that his secret was safely hidden, suddenly realizing that he had become the central figure in the evening's drama. Your father grabbed the photo, Sarah continued, and then he started unfolding the others, one by one, and each one was worse than the last. There were shots of Mom holding hands with this man, entering the hotel, hugging at the elevator entrance. I didn't answer, but Sarah wasn't even waiting. And then, Erica, your father just lost control. He crashed through the table right on top of the guy. They started fighting. Right there, between the cake and the champagne. I felt my fingers go cold. I didn't expect a fight. No, it was even better than I expected. This man's wife, Sarah continued, now almost ecstatically, she started yelling at your mom. She called her all kinds of names, you can't even imagine. She threw everything she could get her hands on at her, glasses, plates, napkins, and even a piece of cake, can you imagine? I bit my lip, imagining the chaos. Mom, once the epitome of dignity, now stands in the middle of her own ruined evening, showered with screams, curses, and leftover desserts. She was yelling that she and this guy have been married for 20 years, that they have 3 children. Sarah lowered her voice, clearly savoring every detail, that your mom is a part-timer. I felt the corners of my lips twitch in a faint smile. Razlaknitsa. Funny. Some of the guests tried to separate everyone, Sarah added, but it was useless. It was just complete chaos. I took a deep breath. Everything happened the way I wanted it to. It sounds intense, I said carefully, trying not to let my voice betray the pleasure I was feeling right now. Oh, Erica, can I be honest? Sarah's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. It was amazing. What do you mean? She giggled. I mean, to see how your mother, who looked down on everyone for years, behaved as if she was better than us, lectured us about morality, about family values, and then it turned out that she was the same, if not worse. It was almost karmically fair. I heard Sarah give a strangled laugh, as if feeling guilty for the pleasure, but unable to hide it. I know, I replied calmly. I thought about my mother's carefully constructed life, her artificially created image of an ideal woman, her precious friends from high society, and about all this, shattered, like champagne glasses that her lover's wife was breaking in anger. Over the next few days, I received messages from various relatives. They told me that my father had moved out of the house and was staying at a hotel. He didn't even try to figure it out or talk to his mom. He just left. What really surprised me was his phone call a few days later. My father was never a man prone to unnecessary conversations, especially when emotions threatened to get out of control, and he was certainly not the one who would call without a good reason, but this time something in his voice immediately made me wary. Erica, he said, and in that single intonation I heard something new, alien, unrecognizable. He sounded older, somehow uncertain, as if he had gone through years in a few days. I need to ask you something. I waited a few seconds, waiting for him to continue, but he seemed to be gathering his courage, and at that moment I realized that the conversation was going to be serious. I'm going to do DNA tests, he finally said, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. All 3 of you. It hit me like a blow. I need samples of your hair and saliva, he spoke slowly, carefully, as if he was afraid I was going to snap and yell at him, but I couldn't even utter a word. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't expect this, although maybe I should have. After what happened, after all those photos, after the fight, after the shame, after his father left home, of course, sooner or later he had to ask this question. Do you think we might not be his children? I asked, and my voice sounded quieter than I would have liked. I don't know what to think anymore, he intervened, and there was something strange and painful in his voice. After learning about your mother's activities, I'm not sure about anything. I swallowed, feeling something heavy and unbearable rise in my chest. Can I get samples? I nodded, realizing that he couldn't see me, and squeezed out. Of course. I can come at any time. Come whenever it's convenient for you. He came the same day. I've never seen him so depressed. His shoulders were slumped, his face was drawn, and there was an emptiness in his eyes that scared me more than all his possible angry outbursts. He was not the strict and confident father I remembered. He was a broken man, desperately trying to piece together what was left of his life. I watched as he carefully collected the samples, placing them in sterile containers, as his hands trembled slightly, although he tried to hide it. I was silent. It's been 2 weeks. I tried not to think about the tests, but it was impossible not to wonder. Deep down, I knew it could change everything. And then Dad called again. Can I come? His voice was strange, strained with emotion. We need to talk. I didn't ask any questions, just said, yes, come. 20 minutes later, he was already sitting on my couch, staring at his hands, as if the answer to all my questions was written there in the folds of his palms. I got the results, he said finally. I waited. You're mine. Only you. It took me a few seconds to realize the meaning of those words. The twins, they're not mine. My heart started beating faster, but I didn't make a sound. Your mother, he looked up at me, his eyes red from sleepless nights. She confessed everything. The air in the room became thick, heavy, unbearable. She started an affair many years ago. Man. She loved him. But he didn't want to leave his family for her. So she agreed that he would have children. I closed my eyes. He died a few years ago, my father continued, and there was a faint tremor in his voice. I've cut off contact with the twins. I looked up sharply. I can't even look at them now. His voice became hollow, detached. Every time I see them, I see lies. The pieces were finally falling into place. All these years, her preferred attitude, constant favoritism, her protection of them, regardless of the circumstances. She loved him, his father said bitterly, and she loved his children. I swallowed the lump in my throat. But she never really loved me. His eyes met mine, and there was so much real pain in them that it became difficult for me to breathe. And you. I didn't have time to say anything when he continued. You were mine. That's why she pushed you away. Made you a stranger in your own home. He ran his hand over his face, exhaled, and looked down. And I. God, Erica, he shook his head. I let her do it. I let her turn me against my only real child. I looked at him, but I didn't say anything. He reached for my hand, but stopped. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've been a terrible father to you. But if you were ready, if you would let me try. He swallowed. I would like to have a relationship with my daughter. My real daughter. I looked at this broken man, my father, and felt a complex mix of emotions, anger, pity, satisfaction, hope. I'll think about it, I finally said. That's all I could offer right now. And then, on Tuesday afternoon, my mother called. I was at a work meeting when the phone lit up with her number. I excused myself and went out to take the call. I know it was you, she said without preamble. Her voice was cold, controlled, but I could hear the rage beneath that icy shell. A birthday present. Photo. All of this, it was you. I didn't hesitate. Yes. Really, her voice faltered, lost control. How dare you humiliate me like that in front of everyone? Do you want to talk about humiliation? And I was pleased. How about spending my entire childhood as your personal servant? How about they tell me that I'm not good enough to come to your birthday party because I don't have a college degree? That's different, my mother's voice broke. but she immediately pulled herself together, said with a new, icy confidence, hoping that like always, I'll give in, I'll let her dodge, like she's been doing all her life. No, Mom, it's not different, I interrupted her before she could unleash her usual tirade about how I misunderstood everything, how I was too cruel, how she, a poor victim of circumstances, deserved sympathy and support. You deliberately humiliated me all my life. You turned my father against me. You turned the twins against me. You made me feel like I wasn't good enough to be a part of this family. I stopped talking, giving her a chance to process what I'd said, but the silence on the other side of the phone said she hadn't expected this. Or maybe, for the first time in her life, she realized that she had no excuses. Well, guess what happens? I continued, feeling the weight that had accumulated over the years lift from my shoulders at my words. I'm the only one who really belongs to this family. There was a long pause. I could hear her ragged breathing, as if she was trying to find the words, but for the first time she didn't know what to say. You've ruined everything, she finally whispered, and panic could be heard in her voice, despite her attempts to maintain dignity. I chuckled. No, Mom, you've ruined everything, I replied, feeling anger give way to something else, something like relief. I just revealed the truth. She tried to say something, but I didn't give her a chance. Maybe the next time you give a lecture on morality and proper behavior, you will remember your own actions. I hung up the phone, not wanting to hear another word. The following months brought huge changes to our family. My father's divorce was finalized faster than expected. He had excellent lawyers and a compelling case. He didn't let her delay the process, didn't give her a chance to play the victim and try to make the most of the situation. The mother, of course, tried to achieve a substantial settlement, but the evidence of her infidelity, combined with the results of the DNA test, left her with little leverage. As a result, she received a modest monetary compensation, which probably did not come close to the lifestyle of a rich divorced woman that she imagined. The last time I heard about her, she moved to another city. As far as I knew, she was no longer in touch with anyone in our family, and to be honest, that suited everyone. Family gossip, of course, worked overtime. The story of how the great Margaret suffered such a shameful fall was passed from mouth to mouth with incredible speed, and surprisingly, most of our relatives seemed pleased with how things turned out. Your mother asked for it, Aunt Jane told me over a cup of coffee, shaking her head. She always looked down on everyone, behaved as if she was better than all of us. I nodded, not knowing what to say. You know, my aunt continued, taking a sip, she once spent the entire Christmas dinner lecturing me on how I was raising my children incorrectly. She shook her head and laughed. Miss Great and Mighty preached about family values herself, while she didn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need to. As for Dad, we were slowly building a relationship, a real one, this time, and not a shadow of the ones we had before. He called regularly, and I invited him to dinner several times. He was still struggling with everything that had happened, still trying to realize that his life, his family, his children were not what he thought they were. But I saw how he was starting to recover. Sometimes he even smiled again. And the twins. I haven't talked to them since it all came out. They tried to call several times at the beginning, but I blocked their numbers. What could they say to atone for their lifelong cruelty? Some might call it revenge. I call it justice. My mother spent years creating the perfect facade, presenting herself as a model of virtue, while treating me like a second-class citizen in my own family. All I did was show everyone who she really was.